The courthouse in the 12th District was an old, heavy building made of gray stone. It looked more like a fortress than a place for justice. Inside, the air always felt still and quiet, smelling of old paper and polish. People spoke in whispers, and their footsteps echoed on the marble floors like distant drums. On the bench in courtroom 3 sat Judge William Atwood. To most people, he was a figure of great respect. He had been a judge for over 20 years, and he ran his courtroom with strict control. He believed in order, in tradition, and in what he called common sense. But his common sense, some people had begun to notice, often depended on who was standing in front of him. If the person accused of a crime was young, and especially if their skin was dark, the judge's face would harden. His questions would become sharper, his tone colder. He would give the longest sentences the law would allow. He saw it as being tough on crime. Others saw it as something else, something uglier, but no one on the inside ever said it out loud. The judge was powerful, and he had friends. A few miles away, in a part of the city the judge never visited, was a small bookstore called the Urban Chapter. It was a warm place, full of the soft smell of books and coffee. The man who seemed to run things there was a quiet, thoughtful person. He was in his late 40s, with a calm way of moving and speaking. He wore simple, neat clothes, button-down shirts and slacks that were clean but not fancy. To the kids who came in after school, he was just the bookshop man. He would help them find books for their projects, listen to their problems, and run a quiet study group in the back corner on Tuesdays. He never talked about himself much. He lived in a small apartment above a nearby shop, drove an ordinary car, and seemed to love history books more than anything. The community knew him as a good neighbor, a steady presence. What they did not know was the truth. The bookshop man was not just a bookshop man. His real name was classified, but his job title was Special Agent in charge for a secret FBI task force. For the past 18 months, he had been living this simple life, building trust, watching, and listening. His mission was to investigate a cancer of corruption growing in the city's heart. In the very courthouse where Judge Atwood Saturday, the FBI had received whispers. Whisper of money changing hands. Whisper of construction contracts for the new courthouse annex being given to a specific company. Whisper that in return, that company's legal troubles, or the troubles of its friends, would disappear. And the loudest whisper pointed to a judge who seemed to make those troubles disappear most often. Judge Atwood, the agent, let's call him the bookshop man for now, had painstakingly pieced together a puzzle. He had met with scared contractors in parking garages late at night. He had tracked bank records that flowed like hidden rivers. He had worn a small recording device to meetings with city officials who thought they were talking to a concerned community leader looking for renovation work. The case was almost ready. They were just waiting for one final piece of evidence, a solid recording that tied the judge directly to a cash payment. One rainy afternoon, the bookshop man had to meet one of his contacts inside the courthouse itself. The contact was a low-level clerk, nervous as a bird, who had agreed to pass along scheduling documents. The meeting was quick, in a dusty records room. The man slipped the documents into his inner jacket pocket and began to walk out. Heading for the back exit, he turned a corner near the main hall. A young lawyer, buried in a thick file, walked right into him. The folder flew from the lawyer's hands, and papers skittered across the shiny floor like frightened birds. "Oh, I'm so sorry," the bookshop man said immediately, his voice the same gentle, low tone he used in the shop. He knelt down, quickly helping to gather the loose sheets. It was at that moment that Judge Atwood walked by. He was finishing for the day, his black robe flowing behind him. He saw a well-dressed black man on his knees, gathering official-looking papers. The sight triggered something deep and ugly in the judge's mind. He didn't see a helpful citizen. He didn't consider a lawyer or another professional. He saw an opportunity to assert his dominance, to put someone in their place. "You there?" The judge's voice boomed, sharp and cold, cutting through the hallway's quiet. "What is your business with those documents?" The bookshop man stood up slowly, handing the stack back to the flustered young lawyer. He turned to face the judge. "It was an accident, sir. We bumped into each other. I was just helping. I didn't ask for an excuse," Judge Atwood said, stepping closer. He looked the man up and down, his eyes narrow. "This is a restricted area. I don't recognize you. Do you have business in this courthouse? The bookshop man felt a familiar cold focus settle over him. This was no longer a simple encounter. It was a field observation. He kept his face neutral, polite. I had a meeting, sir. I was just leaving. A meeting? With who? I know everyone who has business in my courthouse. The judge's voice was dripping with suspicion. He didn't ask for identification. He didn't call for the clerk. He had already tried and convicted the man in his mind of being somewhere he didn't belong. It was a private matter, the man said, his tone still respectful but firm. Private matter, the judge scoffed. He raised a hand and snapped his fingers at a sheriff's deputy standing by the metal detectors. Deputy, escort this gentleman out. I don't want people loitering and handling official papers. The deputy, not wanting to contradict the judge, walked over. Sir, you'll have to come with me. The bookshop man simply nodded. He gave the judge one last, long look, not of anger, but of assessment. He saw the puffed-up pride, the casual cruelty, the absolute certainty of his own power. It was a valuable glimpse into the man's character, more telling than any financial record, without another word. He let the deputy guide him to the front doors and out into the damp afternoon air. The rain had softened to a drizzle. He stood on the steps for a moment, watching the water run down the stone grooves of the old building. He wasn't angry. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford in his line of work. He filed the entire incident away in a cool, professional part of his mind. Subject exhibits overtly prejudicial behavior. Uses authority to intimidate without cause. Believes himself to be above question. He buttoned his jacket and walked down the steps, disappearing into the flow of people on the wet sidewalk. He was just a man leaving a courthouse, heading back to his little bookstore. But inside, the final pieces of a plan were clicking into place. The judge had just made a very powerful enemy, and he didn't have the slightest idea. The bell above the bookstore door gave its usual soft jingle as the man stepped back inside. The warm, familiar smell of paper and old wood wrapped around him, smoothing out the cold edges from the courthouse hallway. A teenager was sitting at the small table in the corner, a textbook open, tapping a pencil. He looked up. Hey, you okay? You look, I don't know, tired. The man managed a small, real smile. Just a long walk in the rain, he said, his voice back to its normal, easy tone. He hung up his damp jacket. Stuck on that math problem again? The boy groaned. It doesn't make any sense. For the next hour, the man was just the bookshop man again. He explained equations. He found an old history book with a perfect map for another student's project. He rang up a sale for an elderly woman looking for a mystery novel. The quiet rhythm of this life was a kind of medicine. It grounded him. It reminded him what all the secrecy and the danger was for. People like these trying to live their lives in a city that sometimes felt like it was working against them. But when the shop was closed, the blinds drawn, he climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment above. Here, the other world took over. In a small room with a single, strong lock on the door, the careful neighbor was gone. In his place was the federal agent. He took the documents from his inner pocket, the ones from the nervous clerk. They were scheduling records for the courthouse's private meeting rooms. He compared them with another list, this one of meetings between a specific construction company owner and various city officials. A pattern, like a shadow on the wall, started to become clearer. Every time the company owner had a legal hearing coming up, he had a private, off-the-books meeting in the courthouse just days before. And the room was always booked under a dummy name, but the approval signature was a familiar, looping scrawl. It was the judge's signature. The agent felt a quiet thrill, the kind that comes from finding the missing piece of a puzzle. This was the link. This placed the judge and the contractor together privately at key moments. But it was still circumstantial. They needed sound. They needed a voice on tape admitting to the deal. His secure phone buzzed. It was his partner from the bureau, a woman he'd worked with for years. Her code name was Lens. "How was the walk?" she asked, her voice flat and professional over the encrypted line. "Informative," he replied. He described the encounter with the judge, sticking to the facts. "He's confident, doesn't think the rules apply to him. It'll make him sloppy." Or more dangerous, Lenz said. Our friend the contractor is getting nervous. He's agreed to wear a wire for the final meeting. It's set for Friday, in the judge's private chambers after hours. He's supposed to deliver a thank you for the last zoning variance that was dismissed. This was it. The final play. I'll be nearby, the agent said. No, Lenz replied, her voice firm. You're too close to the neighborhood now. If this goes bad, you need to be just the bookshop guy. We'll have a team across the street. You stay in your shop, live your life. That's your cover. Protect it. He agreed, though every instinct wanted to be in the thick of it. He ended the call and looked around the small, sparse apartment. A few plants, a shelf of his favorite books. Real ones, not for show, and a single picture on the wall, a photo of his parents, long gone. This life, this quiet identity had started as a costume. But somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred. He cared about the Tuesday study group. He worried about the kid with the math problem. This community had become real to him. Friday morning dawned bright and clear. In the courthouse, Judge Atwood was in a foul mood. A newspaper article had questioned sentencing disparities in his district. The word bias wasn't used, but it hung in the air between the lines. It made him feel attacked, disrespected. Later that afternoon, his clerk told him a package had arrived for him. It was a small, expensive wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a gold fountain pen. There was no note, but he knew what it was. It was from the contractor, a little token for the zoning help. A beautiful, deniable gift. It made him smile, a tight, satisfied smile. This was how things were done. A gesture between gentlemen. He put the pen in his desk drawer, right next to the expensive watch he'd gotten for his birthday last year. A gift from the same contractor. But the watch was missing. He rummaged through the drawer, then his briefcase. A cold knot of panic tightened in his stomach. It wasn't about the money. The watch was worth thousands, but that wasn't it. It was the evidence. A gift from a man he was doing favors for. If it was lost or worse, stolen, his mind, already paranoid from the newspaper article, began to race. Who had been in his chambers? The cleaning staff? They were all vetted. Other judges? No. Then his mind flashed back to the man on the floor. The well-dressed black man gathering papers. The loiterer he'd had thrown out. He'd been right outside his wing of the courthouse. What if he'd been scouting? What if he'd slipped in? The idea took root, fed by his own prejudice. Of course, it made a terrible, perfect sense to him. A criminal casing the place, taking his chance. It wasn't just a theft. It was a personal insult. And it gave him an idea, a brilliant one. He thought if he reported a theft and blamed that suspicious character, it would do two things. First, it might recover the watch or at least explain its absence. Second, and more importantly, it would paint him as a victim. A judge targeted by a thief. It would distract from those nasty newspaper questions. It would generate sympathy. He could be the strong law and order judge, personally wronged by the very element he fought against. He didn't call for an evidence technician. He didn't file a routine report. He picked up his phone and called the sheriff directly, a man he played golf with. "John," he said, his voice full of manufactured outrage. "I've been robbed. Right here in my chambers. I know who did it. It's that same fellow I had escorted out last week. The one loitering around sensitive areas. I want him brought in. Today." On the other end, the sheriff hesitated. "Bill, do we have any proof? Did anyone see him?" "Proof?" the judge snapped. "I'm telling you it was him. Who else could it be? He was here, he was suspicious, and now a very valuable item of mine is gone. That's probable cause enough. I want this man found and I want him charged. Trespassing. Theft. Make it stick." The pressure from a judge, especially this judge, was hard to resist. The sheriff sighed. "Do you have a name? An address?" The judge realized he didn't, but he remembered the face, and he had the power of the state. "Find him," Judge Atwood said, his voice dropping to a low, icy command. "Start with the cameras. Find that man." That evening, as the sun was setting, the bookshop man was helping a young woman find poetry books. The bell jingled again, but this time the sound felt different. Two sheriff's deputies walked in. They looked official, their hands resting on their belts. Their eyes scanned the room and landed on him. "Sir," the first deputy said, not unkindly. "We need you to come with us, please." The teenager in the corner looked up, his eyes wide. The young woman with the poetry books took a step back. The bookshop man felt the world split into two. Part of him was the shocked shopkeeper. The other part was the agent analyzing the threat. This was not the plan. This was the judge moving. But why? How? He put on a mask of confused concern. "Is there a problem, officers?" "We have a warrant for your arrest, sir. Charges of criminal trespass and grand theft. You need to come with us now." Grand theft. The words hung in the air. He knew instantly. This was a setup. A move by a cornered, arrogant man. He felt a cold calm settle over him. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a direct attack. He nodded slowly. "Okay, let me just close up the shop." His movements were deliberate, peaceful. He didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He locked the cash register, picked up his keys, and told the stunned teenager, "Go on home. Tell your mom I had to close early. It's okay." As they led him out to the squad car in the fading light, he saw faces in the windows of nearby shops. His neighbors, his community, watching their quiet, friendly bookshop man being taken away in handcuffs. The humiliation was a real, hot feeling. This was part of the judge's plan too, he realized, to destroy his standing, his character. They put him in the back of the car. At the station, they processed him. They took his fingerprints and his photo. He gave only his cover name. He answered no questions. He requested his one phone call in a cold, concrete-walled room with a payphone. He dialed a number from memory. Lenz answered on the first ring. "It's me," he said, his voice low and steady. "The subject has made a move. I've been taken in on false charges. Theft and trespass. It's a play." There was a short, sharp silence on the other end. Then Lenz's voice, "All business." "Understood. The meeting is still on for tonight." He's trying to create noise, control the narrative. "This could be our break. We'll get you a bondsman. Say nothing. Play the part." "I am the part," he said quietly, and hung up. That he was placed in a holding cell with a few other men. He sat on the hard bench, not talking, just watching and thinking. The fear in the room was a thick smell. For the first time, he wasn't just observing the system from the outside or the investigation file. He was inside it. He was trapped by it, just like the men around him. He felt the crushing weight of it, the helplessness that came when power decided you were guilty. He thought of the judge, sitting in his fine chambers, probably feeling very clever. He had no idea that the man he was trying to crush was not a simple shopkeeper. He had no idea that by acting out of spite and prejudice, he had just stepped right into the center of the trap. The final meeting was tonight, and the bookshop man, sitting in a jail cell, knew the truth. The real robbery was about to begin, and the judge was the one who was going to lose everything. The holding cell was a box of stale air and cold concrete. The bookshop man sat on a metal bench bolted to the wall, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. Around him, the usual nighttime sounds of the jail unfolded: muffled arguments, the clang of a distant door, the low hum of worry that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. A young man across from him shook with silent tears. Another paced, muttering about a lawyer who wouldn't call back. He understood their fear now in a way he never had from an FBI briefing paper. This was the grinding, slow machinery of the system when it turned against you. The powerlessness. The way time stretched and bent. You were no longer a person with a name. You were a case number, a set of charges on a screen. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to think. He replayed every step. The courthouse encounter. The meticulous records he'd gathered. The contractor who was, right at this moment, hopefully walking into the judge's chambers wearing a wire. The judge's move was reckless. A stupid act of pride. That was good. Reckless people made mistakes. But it was also dangerous. A powerful man who felt cornered could do unpredictable things. His thoughts were interrupted by a deputy jangling keys at the cell door. "You." Your bond's been posted. He stood, his body stiff. He didn't ask who. He knew. The bureau worked fast. They would have used a cutout, a bondsman who asked no questions, funded by an untraceable account. He was led back through the buzzing fluorescent lights, given a plastic bag with his personal effects. His wallet, his keys, the simple silver ring he wore. He signed a form without reading it. Out in the lobby, the cool night air hit him. The bondsman, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit, just nodded at him and walked away into the dark. Standing alone under a streetlight was his partner, Lens. She was a woman who could look invisible when she wanted to, average in every way except for the sharp, missing-nothing look in her eyes. Tonight, she looked like a concerned cousin, holding a cheap duffel bag. They walked in silence for 2 blocks before she spoke. "You all right?" "I'm fine," he said. His voice was a little rough. "Status. The meeting happened 72 minutes ago. Our contractor went in nervous as a cat, but he went in. He came out 20 minutes later, pale but gave the signal. He got it. The audio is crystal." A wave of solid relief washed through him, so strong it felt like a physical thing. This was it. The direct evidence. The thing that would turn whispers into proof. "And the judge?" he asked. "Went home after the meeting. Probably thinks he's had a very productive evening. Solved his little theft problem and collected his thanks." Lens handed him the duffel bag. "Change of clothes. Your cover is shaky, but it's still holding. The arrest is just a blip for now. We need you to go back. Be the shopkeeper. Wait for the signal." He took the bag. "What's the charge? I mean, what did he supposedly steal?" Lens almost smiled. A thin, hard line. "A watch. A very expensive watch. It's a weak, stupid charge. He's got no evidence linking you. It's all just him pointing a finger, which, for our purposes, is perfect. It shows motive, bias, and abuse of power. It's the ribbon on the package." He nodded. The pieces were locking together. The false charge wasn't a setback. It was the final piece of the puzzle, showing the judge's corrupt intent for everyone to see. They parted ways. He went back to the apartment above the bookstore. Felt different now. The quiet peace was gone, replaced by a charged silence. He knew the neighbors had seen. The trust he'd built, the gentle identity of the bookshop man, had a crack in it. He sat in the dark, looking out at the street, waiting for dawn. The next morning was Saturday. He opened the shop at the usual time. The bell jingled its same tune. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. But everything felt delicate, like a thin sheet of glass. The teenager from the math group came in just after 10. He didn't go to the back table. He walked right up to the counter, his face serious. "They said you were arrested. For stealing." The man looked at the boy's worried, confused eyes. This was the human cost, the part they never put in the reports. He chose his words carefully, sticking to the truth as his cover allowed. "I was taken in, yes, but I didn't steal anything. Sometimes," he said, keeping his voice calm and even, "people in power make mistakes. They see what they want to see. All we can do is tell the truth and let the system work." The boy searched his face, looking for a lie, and must have found only certainty. "That's messed up," he said finally. "It is," the man agreed, "but getting angry about it right now doesn't help. You still have that algebra test on Monday. Let's work on that." The morning passed slowly. A few regulars came in. They bought coffee, browsed the shelves, threw him looks that were a mix of curiosity and support. He acted normal. He talked about books. He recommended a new novel. He was the bookshop man. Inside, he was a coiled spring. The FBI team was moving now, he knew. The audio evidence was being transcribed, verified. Prosecutors from the Public Integrity Unit were being briefed. A warrant was being drafted. The case had shifted from a secret investigation to an active operation. The trap was about to spring shut. He thought about the judge. He imagined him waking up in his big, quiet house, maybe reading the newspaper, feeling satisfied. He would be expecting a call from the sheriff today, confirming that the troublesome bookshop man was being formally charged. He would probably plan to hold a press conference next week, portraying himself as a victim, a warrior against crime. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. Later that afternoon, his secure phone buzzed once. A coded text message. It was time. He closed the shop early, putting the "back soon" sign in the window. He went upstairs and changed into the one good suit he owned, a dark, simple one he kept for funerals or meetings at the bank. He looked at himself in the mirror. He wasn't a bookshop man right now. He wasn't quite the agent either in his tactical gear. He was something in between. A man walking into a courtroom to finish a job. He met Lenz and two other agents in an unmarked car a few blocks away. The atmosphere was tense, focused. "The plan is clean," Lenz said, handing him a small file. "We have a federal prosecutor, Green, who's been looped in. He'll be in the courtroom. The judge is holding a special afternoon session for a motion on another case. We'll be there. The contractor is already in protective custody. We move the moment the judge gavels the room to order." "What's my role?" he asked. "You are the complainant," Lenz said, "the victim of his false charges. You walk in with us. You stand there. And when the time is right, you show him exactly who you are." They drove to the courthouse, not the back entrance, but the front steps. This was a public display. They walked in, a small, serious group. The courtroom for the motion hearing was nearly empty. Just a few lawyers, a board clerk, and a couple of people in the public gallery. Judge Atwood was already on the bench, looking irritated at having to work on a Saturday. He was shuffling papers, not even looking up as they entered. The agent felt his heartbeat, steady and strong in his chest. This was the moment. All the months of work, the careful lies, the built-up trust in the community, it all led here. They walked to the front of the courtroom. The judge's clerk looked up, confused. "Can I help you?" "This is a closed hearing." Federal Prosecutor Green stepped forward. "Your Honor, my name is Michael Green, from the United States Department of Justice, Public Integrity Section. We need to address the court on a matter of utmost urgency. It pertains directly to you." Judge Atwood's head snapped up. Annoyance flashed across his face, then a flicker of confusion. He saw the serious-faced strangers. He saw Green. His eyes skimmed over the bookshop man, standing quietly with the group, and for a second, there was a spark of recognition, followed by dismissive irritation. "What is that nuisance doing here?" His expression seemed to say. "This is highly irregular," the judge boomed, trying to seize back control. "I am in the middle of a proceeding. You will schedule this through proper channels." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Green said, his voice firm and loud enough for the entire quiet room to hear. "The matter cannot wait. It concerns the case of the state versus," and here he glanced at a file, "the bookshop man's cover name, which you personally instigated. We are here to present exculpatory evidence and to serve notice." The judge's face went pale, then flushed red. "How dare you interrupt my court? This is an outrage." "Bailiff." But the bailiff had seen the federal badges that Lenz and the other agent had subtly displayed. He froze, unsure. Green continued, unshaken. "The evidence, Your Honor, includes sworn testimony, financial records, and audio surveillance obtained last night from your private chambers. It details a bribery conspiracy involving you and the contractor, Benito Ruiz, regarding the dismissal of zoning variances in exchange for gifts, including a gold fountain pen and a luxury watch." The word watch hung in the air. The judge's hand instinctively went to his bare wrist. His eyes were wide, darting around the room like a trapped animal's. He looked again at the bookshop man, and this time the look was different. It was dawning on him, a horrible, slow-motion realization. This was no simple shopkeeper. The bookshop man reached into his inner suit pocket. He didn't pull out a lawyer's note. He pulled out a small, black leather credential case. He flipped it open, holding it up so the light gleamed off the federal seal and the photo ID. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice had changed. All the gentle, neighborhood softness was gone. It was clear, cold, and carried the full, heavy weight of the law. Special Agent in Charge, Federal Bureau of Investigation. For the past 18 months, I have been leading the investigation into public corruption in this district. You are now the primary subject of that investigation." He took a step forward, holding the judge's stunned, terrified gaze. "The false charges you filed against me," he said, every word precise and sharp as a knife, "constitute obstruction of justice and a deprivation of rights under color of law. They are your final acts in this courtroom." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Lenz. She and the other agent moved forward, around the bench. The judge stood up, knocking his chair back, a wordless sound escaping his lips. He was no longer a judge. He was just a man caught, his power evaporating into the cold air of the room he once ruled. "Judge William Atwood," Lenz said, her voice ringing in the silent courtroom. "You are under arrest." The silence in the courtroom was absolute and heavy. It was the kind of silence that comes after a loud noise, where the air itself feels stunned. For a few seconds, no one moved. The bored lawyers at their tables had frozen, pens hovering above legal pads. The clerk's mouth hung slightly open. The bailiff stood rooted to his spot, his hand away from his weapon, his eyes wide. Judge Atwood was a statue behind his high bench. All the color had drained from his face, leaving it a pale, waxy gray. His eyes were locked on the FBI credentials in the agent's hand, as if hoping they might dissolve into smoke. His mind, usually so quick to issue orders or cutting remarks, was a white blank of pure terror. The words "primary subject" and "under arrest" echoed in the hollow space inside his head, not making sense. Then, the reality crashed down. A violent tremor ran through him. He took a shaky step back, his hip bumping against his overturned chair with a thud that was terribly loud in the quiet room. This is an outrage," he sputtered, but the famous boom was gone from his voice. It was a thin, reedy sound, cracked with panic. A sham, a trick. His eyes darted to the other people in the room, looking for an ally, for someone who would stand and say this was impossible. He saw only shock, and in some faces, a dawning, grim satisfaction. The two FBI agents, including Lenz, moved with a calm, practiced efficiency. They came around the sides of the judicial bench. This was a space reserved for the judge and his staff, a sacred zone of his authority. Now they were crossing into it like it was just ordinary floor. "Sir," Lenz said, her voice devoid of any emotion. It was not loud, but it carried. "You need to come with us. Now." "Don't you, sir, me!" the judge shrieked, finding a last drop of fury from his fear. He pointed a trembling finger at the bookshop man, the agent, who had now placed his credentials back in his pocket and stood watching, his face an unreadable mask. "He's the criminal. He's the one who should be in cuffs. This is a conspiracy. I am a judge of the 12th District." The federal prosecutor, Green, spoke again. He held up a thick sheaf of papers. "The conspiracy, Your Honor, is documented here. Signed statements from contractor Benito Ruiz. Bank records tracing payments to shell companies linked to your brother-in-law. And a digital audio recording from last night's meeting in your chambers. You are heard discussing the gift of the watch in the context of the Henderson zoning dismissal. The one you later falsely reported stolen." Each word was like a physical blow. The judge flinched. The watch. It had all started with the stupid watch. His frantic, arrogant plan to cover his tracks and smear a man he viewed as beneath him had instead laid the final, perfect piece of evidence at the FBI's feet. His legs felt weak. He gripped the edge of the wooden bench to steady himself. Lenz and the other agent were beside him now. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back," the other agent said. It was not a request. The judge looked out at the courtroom. He saw the young lawyer who had been arguing the motion earlier. The man looked away, unable to meet his gaze. He saw the clerk, who was now staring fixedly at her computer screen, her cheeks red. He was utterly alone. The power, the respect, the fear he had cultivated for 2 decades. It had evaporated in 60 seconds. It had never been real. It had been a costume, and now they were stripping it off him in front of everyone. With a shuddering breath that was almost a sob, he turned. He faced the great seal of the state that hung on the wall behind his chair, a seal he had sworn an oath to. He felt the cold, metallic click of the handcuffs around his wrists, tight and unforgiving. The sound seemed to echo forever. They guided him, gently but firmly, out from behind the bench. As he was led down the 3 short steps to the main floor, he stumbled. His legs didn't want to work. The agents held him upright. He was walking the same path he had seen 1,000 defendants walk, heads down, facing the doors at the back. The walk of shame. He passed right by the agent. He stopped, forcing the agents to halt. He looked at the man he had thrown out of the courthouse, the man he had falsely accused. Up close, he could see the sharp intelligence in the man's eyes, the complete absence of gloating or anger. There was just a cool, professional assessment. It was worse than hatred. "Who are you?" the judge whispered, the question tearing out of him from a place of pure, bewildered defeat. The agent considered him for a moment. "I'm the man you tried to destroy to cover up your crimes," he said, his voice low so only the judge could hear. "And I'm the man who did his job." They led the judge away, through the doors and into the bright hallway. The small group in the courtroom remained frozen for another moment in the strange silence. Then, a low buzz of conversation started, frantic and excited. The agent did not watch them go. He turned to Prosecutor Green. "I need to see the arrest processed. Then I need to get back." Green nodded. "Of course, the case is airtight. He won't be sleeping in his own bed tonight." Across town, the news traveled in ripples. It hit the police scanner first. A stunning, garbled report about an arrest at the courthouse. Then, a local news reporter, who had a tip about the federal investigation, confirmed it. By early evening, it was the lead story. In the neighborhood of the bookstore, people heard it on their radios, saw the quick bulletins on their phones. Judge William Atwood arrested in a federal corruption sting, FBI investigation, false charges. The details were slim, but they were enough. The teenager from the math group was sitting at his kitchen table, his textbook forgotten, listening to the radio with his mother. When he heard the judge's name, his head snapped up. "Mom, that's the judge. The one who had him arrested." His mother, a tired-looking woman who worked 2 jobs, shook her head slowly. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. So he was telling the truth. At the small community church, a deacon heard the news and made a few quick calls. At the barbershop, the conversation about the game stopped, replaced by this new, unbelievable topic. Back at the FBI field office, it was all controlled chaos. The agent had changed out of his suit into more casual clothes. He was no longer the center of the operation. Now it was in the hands of the lawyers and the evidence technicians. His part was essentially over. He gave a final, detailed statement, signed some forms, and was told he would be debriefed fully next week. Lenz walked him to the elevator. "You should take a few days," she said. "That was a long ride." He nodded. "I'm going back to the shop." "You think that's wise?" "The cover is blown wide open. Everyone will know." "They deserve to see me," he said simply. "They deserve an explanation, as much as I can give." He drove his ordinary car back to his neighborhood. The streets looked the same, but everything felt different. As he parked and walked toward the bookstore, he saw curtains twitch in windows. People on their porches stopped talking to watch him walk by. There was no anger, no fear, just a deep, profound curiosity. He unlocked the bookstore door and flipped the sign to open. He half expected no one to come in, for the place to be treated like a crime scene. 10 minutes later, the bell jingled. It was the teenager and his mother. Then the elderly woman who loved mystery novels. Then the deacon from the church. Then a few others. They didn't say much at first. They browsed, they pretended to look at books. Finally, the teenager could hold it in no longer. He walked up to the counter. "It was you, wasn't it? On the news. The FBI guy." The man looked at the faces of his neighbors, people he had lived beside for a year and a half. He saw the questions in their eyes. He owed them something more than his cover story now. "My job was to find the truth," he said, choosing his words with care. To find out why some people in this city never seem to get a fair shake. The man who had me arrested, the judge, he was part of that problem. A big part. So yes, I was working on that. So you were lying to us? The teenager asked, hurt in his voice. The job required me to keep a secret, he said, meeting the boy's gaze. But the person you talked to, the one who helped with your homework, that was real. This place, he said, looking around at the shelves, became real to me. I wasn't lying about caring what happens here. There was a long pause. The elderly woman nodded slowly. We knew you were a good man, she said softly. We just didn't know you were a brave one, too. The tension in the room broke. People started asking questions not about the investigation, but about what would happen next. Would he leave? Would the shop close? He held up his hands. I'm still here. The shop is still open. And he allowed himself a small, tired smile. We still have a math test on Monday. As the small crowd eventually drifted out, talking excitedly amongst themselves, he was left alone in the quiet shop. The evening sun slanted through the window. He felt a deep exhaustion, but beneath it, a solid peace. The job was done. The community knew, and they had not turned away. He was not just an agent in their eyes anymore. He was the bookshop man who had also been the agent. It was a more complicated identity, but it felt true. He locked up and went upstairs. For the first time in 18 months, he didn't have to check his secure phone. He didn't have to review surveillance logs. He made himself a simple dinner and sat by the window, watching his neighborhood settle into a peaceful night. The long game was over. Now he just had to live with the result. The week that followed was a strange, slow-moving river of change. News vans, like metal insects, camped on the courthouse steps for 2 days, but found little to feed on. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office released a short, dry statement confirming the arrest of Judge William Atwood on multiple federal charges. And that was that. There were no dramatic press conferences, no leaking of details. The system, when it finally moved against one of its own, did so with a quiet, brutal efficiency. For the bookshop man, life took on a new rhythm. The secret was out, and with its release came a kind of freedom, mixed with a new set of challenges. The first Tuesday after everything happened, he wasn't sure if the study group would come. He set up the back table as usual, put out the spare pencils and the old coffee pot at 3:30. The bell jingled. It was the teenager, but he wasn't alone. He brought 2 friends from school the bookshop man had never seen before. Then the young woman who liked poetry came, not for poetry, but with a biology textbook. A few others trickled in. The table was full. No one mentioned the FBI. They talked about quadratic equations and the Civil War and cell structure. But the feeling in the room was different. There was a subtle current of respect, a sense that they were sharing space with someone who had stepped into a story they'd only ever seen on TV. He was still their tutor, still the calm voice explaining complicated things, but now he was also a symbol of something. That the world wasn't fixed, that sometimes the bad guy actually loses. He learned that the neighborhood had known more than he'd thought. The elderly mystery novel lady, Mrs. Jenkins, brought him a pie. We always knew you were hiding something, dear, she said, her eyes twinkling. You were too polite, too put together. But we decided whatever it was, you were one of the good ones. Glad to know we were right. The work at the bureau was not over, but his part in the active case was. He spent days in a bland office building downtown, giving his formal debriefing. He went over every meeting, every recorded conversation, every observation of the judge. It was tedious, but it was the necessary paperwork of justice. His partner, Lenz, was often there, and they would share a coffee in the cafeteria, talking about everything except the job. What's next for you? She asked one afternoon. They'll offer you a desk job for a while. A teaching position at Quantico. You've earned it. He stirred his coffee. He'd been thinking about little else. The quiet, rooted life above the bookstore had been a cover, but it had seeped into his bones. The idea of going back to the constant rotation of field assignments, of temporary apartments and fake names, felt empty. I don't know, he said honestly. The shop. It doesn't feel like a cover anymore. Lenz just nodded. She understood. The job had a way of taking pieces of you and leaving other pieces behind. Across the city, in a federal detention center, William Atwood sat in a small, beige-colored cell. He was no longer in a suit. He wore a standard-issue jumpsuit. The world had shrunk to this. A cot, a sink, a toilet, and the crushing weight of his own thoughts. His lawyers came and went, their faces growing grimmer each time. The evidence was not just strong. It was overwhelming. The audio recording was the nail in the coffin. He could hear his own voice, smooth and confident, talking about thank you gifts and future considerations. Hearing it played back was a special kind of hell. He had been so sure of his own cleverness, so insulated by his robe and his gavel. But worse than the legal doom was the silence. No colleagues called. No friends from the club sent messages. The world of respect and invitations he had built over a lifetime had vanished as if it had never existed. He was a punchline, a cautionary tale. The only thing left was the cold, hard truth of what he had done, and the even colder truth of why he had done it. The prejudice he had carried so comfortably had been the very thing that blinded him, that made him target the one man who could destroy him. His arrogance had been his own trap point. One of his court-appointed lawyers, a weary-looking woman, laid it out for him. They have everything. The best we can do is plead guilty. Avoid a trial. It will mean a shorter sentence, maybe 10 to 15 years. You'll be in your 70s when you get out. The word guilty echoed in the sterile visiting room. For a man who had spent his career declaring others guilty, it was a bitter pill. He stared at the table, at his own soft, uncalloused hands, now without a gavel or a gold pen to hold. He gave a small, jerky nod. There was no fight left. A month after the arrest, the bookshop man was asked to come to the U.S. Attorney's office. Prosecutor Green wanted to see him. He put on his simple suit and drove downtown. The route now familiar. Green's office was tidy, with a view of another office building. He gestured to a chair. "It's over," Green said. "Atwood pled guilty this morning to all charges. Conspiracy, bribery, obstruction, deprivation of rights. He'll be sentenced in a few months, but the outcome is certain." The agent absorbed the news. There was no great victory cheer. It was just a fact. Corrupt man was being removed. The system had worked, this time, because people had done their jobs correctly and at great personal risk. "There's something else," Green said, sliding a folded letter across the desk. It was on simple, elegant stationery. "This came for you, care of this office. It's from him." The agent didn't touch it. "What does it say?" "I don't know. It's not evidence. It's personal." He asked his lawyer to have it passed to you. "You can read it or you can throw it away. It's up to you." He left the office with the letter in his pocket. Felt heavy like a stone. He didn't open it that day or the next. He kept it on the small desk in his apartment above the shop. An unopened question mark. Finally, one rainy evening, with a cup of tea in his hand, he slit the envelope open. The handwriting was neat, precise, a judge's handwriting. "I do not expect your forgiveness. I am not writing to ask for it. I am writing because you are the only one who might understand the scale of the ruin. You saw the mechanism from both sides. You sat in my cell. You wore my handcuffs. I thought I was the one in control. I thought the law was a tool that I wielded. You showed me it is a structure that exists with or without me. My error was believing I was part of the foundation when I was only ever a tenant. What I did to you was the worst of it, not the bribes. Those were transactions. What I did to you was born of a sickness in my soul that I called judgment. I saw you and I did not see a man. I saw a symbol of everything I feared and looked down upon. That arrogance was my true crime, and it was the one that led to all the others. I will spend a long time in a small room. I deserve that. But you walked out of that cell and back into the world. I suppose that is the difference between us. I built walls to keep people out. You built a bookstore to let them in. I do not know if there is justice in that, but there is a kind of truth." He read it twice, then carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. He felt no pity, but he felt the heavy weight of the man's understanding, arrived at far too late. It was not an apology. It was an autopsy report of a career and a character. He placed the envelope in a drawer and closed it. The seasons began to turn. The agent officially took a leave of absence from the bureau. The desk job could wait. He had saved money for years, living simply undercover. He used some of it to buy the bookstore building from its elderly, retiring owner. The urban chapter would stay open. One afternoon, he was unpacking a box of new books, history books, his favorite. The bell jingled. It was the teenager, now helping out part-time for a little extra cash. "Hey," the teenager said, shelving some books nearby. He was quieter now, more thoughtful. "Can I ask you something? Not about the case. About after." "Sure. Does it feel finished?" The man paused, a book in his hand. He looked around the shop, at the shelves he had built, at the community bulletin board thick with flyers for local events, at the warm light pooling on the worn wooden floor. "The case is finished," he said. "The man is gone. But the work isn't. The work is here." He put the book on the shelf in its right place. "It's making sure this place stays open. It's helping you pass your math test. It's being a neighbor who people can trust. That's the real work. And that's never really finished." The teenager nodded, seeming to understand. He went back to shelving. The man finished unpacking the box. He wiped the dust from his hands and walked to the front window. Outside, people walked by on the sidewalk. Kids were coming home from school. The city was moving, alive and complicated. He was no longer undercover. But in a way, he felt more himself than he ever had. He was the bookshop man. And that, for now, was more than enough. He flipped the sign on the door to open and turned to face the quiet, waiting shelves, ready for whatever came through the door next.